So still with checks and balances here. And this just goes into a little bit more detail over how the Supreme Court got its power, okay, and what that power is. Okay, so judicial review was not actually found in the Constitution. It's not explicit, okay? They actually used, remember when we read the two Federalist Papers, number 10 and 71, okay? In Federalist Paper number 78, Hamilton writes about this power. He describes the judicial branch as by far the weakest of the three branches. This is the Supreme Court building today. But the first Supreme Court, they met in the unfinished basement of the Capitol. And they really didn't have this power until a Supreme Court case came along that used Federalist number 78, written by Hamilton, to justify this power by the court called judicial review. Does anybody remember what that case was in 1803? Starts with an M. M&M. You've all heard of it. M versus M. Marbury versus, Marbury versus Madison. 1803. Okay. All right. We'll get to that. All right. So the law, a law that is found to be invalid, that goes against the Constitution, is deemed unconstitutional. This law or act can no longer be enforced by government. Okay. You guys have all heard things being called unconstitutional. Like you studied the New Deal last semester, and a bunch of the New Deal was deemed unconstitutional. Okay. Because what Congress, the laws that Congress was passing, many of them during the New Deal, were giving powers to the national government that were not found in the Constitution. Okay? You guys have all heard of the minimum wage, right? In 1936, the Supreme Court ruled that the national government had no power to tell employers how much they had to pay their employees. I mean, where in the Constitution does it say that Congress can pass laws telling employers how to run their businesses? It's not in there. But we have the minimum wage today. How is that possible if in 1936 they declared it unconstitutional? How many judges are on the Supreme Court? 9. Are the ones that made that decision in 1936 still on the court? No, they're all dead. And then you have new members that interpret the Constitution in a different way. Following me? Okay. So actually what happened there, and I don't know if your history teacher talked about this. Roosevelt talked about packing the court. You guys remember talking about that? Packing the court. So there's 9 justices, okay? He wanted to add 6. Now, who gets to choose Supreme Court justices? The president. So Roosevelt wanted to add 6. So he would be able to choose all 6 of these, okay? And he wanted a retirement age. You know, these people serve for life of 70. Well, 2 of the judges were over the age of 70. So Roosevelt, would have been able to pick 8 of 15, which is the majority. Does this not smack of one branch of government trying to take over another branch of government? Yeah. Okay, now this didn't actually take place, but the fact that he threatened this, these two guys that were old guys over the age of 70, they switched their vote on the minimum wage. It said, we were wrong. It is constitutional to allow government to tell businesses how much they have to pay their employees. And that's how we got the minimum wage. Okay? By President Roosevelt bullying the Supreme Court into doing it. Okay? Now, how many of you guys have jobs? Okay. Do any of you work for $7.25? You do? Where do you work? You work on a farm? What do you do at the farm? Do you milk cows? Really? That's awesome. That's worth more than $7.25 an hour, isn't it? That's hard work. Jeez. It's building some character in you, though. Yeah. Those are skills that most of us will never have. So as far as survivalists goes, you'll be one of those that survives, yes. Okay. The crap hits the fan. Okay. The rest of us will be like, how come my phone's not working? Right? We'll be lost. You know who you are. Okay. So anyhow, so we have one person that works for minimum wage in here. Okay. And most of you guys have jobs. Okay. Most people don't work for minimum wage. And by the way, the $15 minimum wage that was in the COVID Relief Act that is going to pass Congress today, $1.9 trillion, they took the minimum wage out. The raising it to $15. That's not going to happen. Okay. Now, states can raise their own minimum wage. So like in California, they have a higher minimum wage than we do. So the $7.25 is the national. States can go above that. And obviously some states have higher costs of living than others, right? Like it's very expensive to live in California and New York. You know what I mean? So it makes sense for them to maybe have a higher wage, okay? Because you can't afford housing at $7.25 in California. You'd have to work, 80 hours a week, which is, some people do, but it's hard to do. You know what I mean? Okay. All right, so that's how we got that. So when laws are invalid, they're deemed unconstitutional. But also, actions of the president can be deemed unconstitutional. Okay? So the Supreme Court has judicial review over both of these bodies. That makes sense. Okay? So, like I said, this power comes. So it's not mentioned directly in the Constitution, as I said, but this power is implied. Okay, and that's one of the things we're going to learn in the next chapter is express powers, implied powers, inherent powers, concurrent powers, state powers. Okay, that'll be in the next section, okay, or next chapter. But this principle is firmly established in this court case in 1803. Does anybody remember who the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court was? He was on your last test. He was one of the Federalist Papers authors. John Jay, yeah. And he quit. You know what I mean? Like they're in the basement of the Capitol. He has no power. Why do they even exist? And I mean, sometimes to help settle disputes between states and so forth. But they didn't have this power until Chief Justice John Marshall, who was the Justice of the Supreme Court in 1803, they made this decision giving themselves this power. Okay, they took an implied power from the Constitution and took Federalist number 78 by James Madison, and they said, we have this power. Okay, so when we talk about the three branches, I think the founders is pretty simple to understand that if they wanted any of the three branches to be the most powerful, it would be the legislative, the one that is closest to you and I. They represent us, okay? But by 2021 today, guys, I think if you ask which is the most powerful branch, you'd almost have to say the judicial branch. You have 9 people appointed for life. They're not even elected. They're selected. okay? And they get to determine whether the actions or laws of the other two are valid or not. That's a lot of power. When the Supreme Court makes decisions, they change culture. They change the country when they make decisions, oftentimes, okay? Supreme Court came out with a decision yesterday, and I didn't read the whole thing, but it was about a Christian group of students that were on a college campus, and they were proselytizing, they were evangelizing on this college campus, and the college kicked them off. Okay, they sued the college, and that decision was 8-1 in favor of the students, the freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Okay, so college campuses have to allow that. They have to allow free speech, okay, and freedom of religion on their campuses. Okay, it's First Amendment. Okay, Chief Justice John Roberts was the only one that voted no. Okay, now he said that the students didn't have standing because they weren't enrolled at the institution. Okay, but it was a public institution. Okay, which means we all pay for it if it's public. You understand, with our tax dollars. So that's, you know, that's upholding our rights. Okay, so kicking students off of a college campus for evangelizing is unconstitutional. Good? I think so. That's good. All right. So when we talk about actions of the executive, I don't know if I've told you this story before. You guys have all heard of the Trail of Tears, right? This was the Cherokee Indians in Georgia, and President Andrew Jackson was trying to remove them from Georgia and send them west, okay? And he started doing this, and the Supreme Court came in and said, President Jackson, you can't do this. President Jackson responded, come down here and stop me. The Supreme Court, so the president is the executive, right? He carries the sword. The Supreme Court doesn't have a sword. They just make decisions. So, what could have happened to President Jackson by violating this order by the Supreme Court? How do we check the president here when he violates what the Supreme Court says is unconstitutional behavior? Say it. Yeah, they could have impeached him, but Congress didn't impeach him because most of the members of Congress agreed with moving the Indians. Okay. Today, if the president violated an action, you know, that the Supreme Court said, Mr. President, you can't do that. If he violated that, chances are you would see an impeachment. Okay. 99.9% of the time, both Congress and the executive branch abide by what the Supreme Court says. Does that make sense? Okay. But the Supreme Court doesn't have an arm, you know, they don't have a sword. They can't, you know. So they are, out of respect, the other branches generally abide by what they say. Okay. All right. So in your essay, you might want to mention judicial review. Okay. And maybe this court case, we're talking about checks and balances, and obviously this is a very important one. Okay. To the process. Okay. All right, so the fifth basic principle, and this is something you've heard of before, is federalism. Okay. I defined this for you early on as the division or sharing of powers between national, state, and local government. Okay. So this is part and parcel to everything we've kind of talked about to this day. Okay, the three boxes. We started with the confederal system, where all the power was at the state and local level, right? And then we switched to a federal system. The national, state, and local governments all share or powers divided between them. Okay. So this was the debate over the new Constitution, was the Federalists that supported this versus the anti-Federalists that did not want to see that much power going to the national government. Okay. So now we have it. It's been ratified. Now we got to learn how federalism works. Okay, so we're going to do a whole chapter on it, chapter 4, okay, after the Constitution, right? And it's something that a lot of Americans don't understand, they don't pay attention to. And over the last 50 years, we've seen massive changes in our federal system, okay? This is what some of the biggest debates we have in this country. The Civil War was fought over this. Because some of these states said they wanted to retain the institution of slavery. The national government, which is supreme, said, you need to get rid of that. And the states rejected that and said, we're going to leave. We're going to secede from the Union, yes? And the national government said, you can't do that without our permission. And they said, we don't care, we're going to do it anyway. And so Abraham Lincoln decided to preserve the Union, keep them together. And they had to do that through a civil war. What was the underlying argument? Of course, slavery is the overlying. But the underlying argument is federalism. Okay? So this protects the rights of states by establishing the federal system of government. So some powers are granted to the national government. Some are left to the states and local governments. Okay? But Article 6 of the Constitution here lays out the supremacy that the national government is superior to the states, and the Constitution of the United States is superior to the state constitutions. And the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Simple. Supreme law of the land. So when we get to federalism next chapter, we'll dive into some of those powers that are granted just to the national government, just to the states and local governments, and ones they share. Okay? So, like, just quick examples here. You know, Kansas cannot print its own money. Only the national government can print money, coin money. Okay? Kansas cannot declare war on Canada. As much as we may want to, we can't. Okay. Only Congress can declare war. Okay, so that's that's pretty basic. And as we learn the amendments, guys, the 10th Amendment, the last of the Bill of Rights, really reinforces this idea of federalism. Okay, and tries to protect states from an overreaching national government. Okay. So to quote Article 6, the Constitution and the laws of the United States should be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So your state laws are trumped by the U.S. Constitution. This is what allowed us, guys, to do away with things like Jim Crow laws of segregation. Okay? It took a long time to do that in this country. But it is the Constitution that allowed for that to change. Okay? And let me just point something out to you. I'm going to go back to the previous slide real quick. Okay. This only occurs when laws are challenged. Okay, so Congress can pass a law today that is for sure unconstitutional. Okay, but it will remain a law until somebody is a victim of that law and somebody sues against that law. And then and only when the Supreme Court, when 4 of the 9 justices agree to hear a case, will the Supreme Court take that case. So the Supreme Court generally only takes cases it feels the American people are ready for them to decide on. So Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, which says separate is not equal. They waited a long time to make that decision. 1954. Okay, how many of you guys have ever seen a movie like Remember the Titans? The integration of the school, right? The integration of the football team in this movie, which is so much based on reality. Okay, that's what makes it such a good movie, because it's so much, it's real. It touches people. But they waited a long time to do that, you understand? But the Supreme Court prior to 1954 was either unwilling or they didn't think the American people were ready for integration, especially in the South. Okay? And even then in 1954, there was a lot of resistance to it, yes? Okay. Even here in places like Wichita, Kansas. Okay, there was a lot of resistance to it. My assistant coach, Paul Sanagorski, he's in his 70s. He was student teaching at South High when they first integrated that school. Okay. He said it was pretty tense. South High used to be all white. Okay. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. And guys, I'm going to teach you about this and how this works, okay? I really wish I had you for history too, but okay. So when we look at federalism, like I said, we'll dig into this more in the next chapter. There are different phases of federalism in American history, okay? Hey. Hello. So in those phases in American history, it's a kind of a tug of war between the state and the national government. So in some parts of American history, the states gain more power. In some parts of American history, the national government gains power. It's a tug of war. And these are fights we have to this day, okay, over who gets to make the decisions, state or national government, okay? And so this is just kind of a map of that. You have the Articles of Confederation, and then 1789 with the new Constitution, federal supremacy, okay? Then you get to 1830s, okay, what's called dual federalism, and then cooperative federalism we get in the 1930s under the New Deal, and then creative and new federalism, which is tragic, I believe. And then the 1990s, you see devolution, which means you're returning some of that power back to the states, okay, which was really positive, which we'll talk about in the next chapter, okay? I don't want to steal my own thunder, because I got some thunder. All right, so we've done the 5 basic principles of the Constitution. Let's review. Popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, and federalism. Okay, so on your test, you're going to have an intro, 5 body paragraphs. Some of those body paragraphs will be 2 to 3 sentences. Just make sure you cover it, okay? And then separation of powers, checks and balances is going to be a little bit longer paragraph. You got to go into some details, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, describing the 3 branches, what they do, and then checks and balances, how they do that against each other, adding in judicial review, and then federalism is a fairly short paragraph as well. Throw in a little conclusion, and we're golden. Okay, we'll go back over that before the test. All right, so this is amending the Constitution. So Article 5, there's 7 articles. First three branches. Article 4 talks about the relationship between the states and the national government. Article 5 talks about amending the Constitution. And that's one of the brilliant things of this Constitution, guys, is they put in a way to change it without starting over from scratch, which allows us to claim that our Constitution is the oldest Constitution in the world today. It's over 230 years old. Okay, 230 some years old. Okay, so how many amendments do we have? Does anybody remember that? 27. Okay, so there's 2 ways to propose an amendment, and there's 2 ways to ratify an amendment. Okay. An amendment is simply a change to the Constitution. That's all it is. It's a change to the Constitution. Okay. So, 2 ways to propose, 2 ways to ratify. I've got this laid out nice and neat for you, easy to understand. Okay. We may have some videos coming later in the week. I'm trying to stretch this out a little bit so we can do the amendments together. So we'll see what happens. All right, so to propose, you got to have 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose an amendment. Okay. And all 27 amendments have been proposed by this man. Okay. But there is another way to propose an amendment. They put it in there. Okay. Let me just talk about this real quick. Do you guys think there's any way that these 2 bodies would vote to propose an amendment to put term limits on themselves? These people serve for 2 years, a term. The Senate serves for 6 years. Say they say, okay, you can do no more than 4 terms in the House. That would be 8 years. And no more than 3 terms in the Senate, which would be 18 years. You see them ever doing this? No. So the wise gentleman that wrote this Constitution said, we're going to put in another way to propose an amendment. Okay? And that is by a national convention of the states. You might add that, of the states. Okay? Now, when you think of that, think of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia that we just studied. 55 delegates from the 13 colonies. In this case, you would bring in delegates from all 50 states, and those delegates would propose amendments to the Constitution. Now, you would need 34 states to do that. Okay, you need 2/3 of the states. Just like you need 2/3 of the House and Senate, you need 2/3 of the states, which is 34. I think I talked about this in here. The National Convention of the States. Did I talk about the cult I was involved with? This button? Yeah. Okay. So thus far, 14 states have agreed to do this. I'm talking right now. Okay. 14 states have agreed to send delegates for a national convention of the states. Okay. We need 34 states to do that. Kansas is not yet. But we're working on it. Okay. If you're interested in this, all you have to do is go online and look up Google Kansas Convention of the States, and you can lend your support to the cause. or the Colt, okay, as my wife calls it. Okay. No, but seriously, I mean, this is one of the amendments. Term limits is one. Okay. The other is like, besides the 16th and 17th, I went over that with you guys, right? So the 16th, 17th need to be repealed. Didn't I go with that with you? Yeah. Okay. I can't help myself. All right. So anyhow, another one is a balanced budget amendment. Okay. You guys know that Kansas has to balance its budget every year. We cannot run a debt like the national government does. Which, by the way, guys, with this $1.9 trillion relief package, we're pushing $30 trillion. Okay, and I read an article about this last night. Republicans used to talk about this a lot. Republicans used to be like, hey, we got a problem here, the national debt. Okay, they don't seem to talk about it anymore. Nobody seems to talk about it. It's like the gorilla in the room, or the 64,000-pound elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. It's there, it's huge, and nobody wants to deal with it. Because everybody's looking out for short-term benefit. These people are looking out for short-term benefit so they can get reelected. They're not looking at the future of your children and your grandchildren. They don't care. You understand? They don't care. They may say they care, Republicans and Democrats. I'm not picking on one of them, okay? But they're not looking out for the future of this country. They're looking out for the now. So a balanced budget amendment. So if Kansas comes up short, like so much of the tax revenue from Kansas comes from farming and from natural gas and oil. So if oil prices drop, tax revenue to the state of Kansas goes down. If farm prices drop, tax revenue to the state of Kansas goes down. And so the governor and the state legislature, we spend most of our money on education and roads. That's the two biggest budget things that the state of Kansas has. You can throw Medicaid into that too. Okay, that's pretty expensive. So those three things. What happens is if we don't have enough money, what do you have to do? You cut the spending. The national government never cuts spending. They create programs, they never go away. Because if they cut a program, it's going to cause pain for somebody. And their political opponent in the next election is going to criticize them for causing pain for anybody. You understand? It's used as a political tool to go against somebody for cutting programs that may be wasteful or ineffective or inefficient. We never get rid of them. Okay? Can I just give you an example? Are you interested in what I'm talking about? Okay, let's talk about the Department of Education. I'm speaking of the U.S. Department of Education, okay, in Washington, D.C. They spend over $80 billion a year. They have tens of thousands of people that work for the U.S. Department of Education, okay? Prior to the U.S. Department of Education in 1976, states and local communities ran education without any interference from the national government. So they create this huge program, this department in Washington, D.C., spend billions of dollars every year telling us how to educate you. Okay? Can we do without that? Did we survive for 200 years without that? I mean, if you're ever going to balance a budget in this country, you've got to cut something. You just can't keep adding taxes and programs and debt. You got to do some of both. You can raise taxes, tax the rich, whatever you want to do, but you're still not going to have enough money to do all these things the government is doing. Okay, and people need to pay attention to this, because it's going to affect us more more you than me. Your kids more than you. This is going to come back to bite us eventually. Because you guys, we have to pay interest on that debt, that $30 trillion. We have to pay interest on that. So that's a big chunk of the federal budget every year. And it's going to start to consume more and more of what the government spends is the interest on the debt. It's not good, but nobody seems to care. Okay, sorry. All right. Let me finish this up, okay? Well, actually, I probably won't finish this up, but all right. So you could do this balanced budget amendment, okay, or term limits, but you're not going to get that from Congress. It's going to have to be a national convention of the states, okay? All right, so you got two ways to propose an amendment. You got two ways to ratify an amendment. Pretty simple, okay? So 26 of the 27 have been ratified by state legislatures, and you need 3/4 of the state legislature. That's a lot, 38. So you guys have heard of people talk about doing away with the electoral college? Like, we need to just go to the popular vote. It's not fair, whatever, okay? You could see possibly 2/3 of both houses of Congress proposing an amendment to get rid of the electoral college. But are you going to get 38 states to go along with that? No way. Because all those small states are going to be like, we're not giving up this power. No way. I mean, you're not, any of those with 3 to 9 electoral college votes, you're not going to get those states to ratify this. You need 38, okay? You guys, in my lecture Thursday, I'm going to talk about this, okay? And ladies, you'll want to pay close attention to this discussion, okay? I'm sorry you won't be here for it, because I sure would like to have your input, okay? But we'll have to rely on the other half of the class, okay? So, like I said, 26 to the 27. So this would be like the state legislature in Topeka. Amendment was proposed, and then the state legislature will vote on it, okay, to ratify it or not. Okay, so 38 states to do that. 3/4. Okay. And then the other way is through state conventions, and only one of the 27 was ratified this way. And that was the 21st Amendment. Does anybody know what the 21st Amendment was? Let me give you a hint. These special state conventions must have been a really fun time or spirited time. Repeal of prohibition. They were making it legal to drink again. Okay, so I'll describe that tomorrow or Thursday in my lecture about how you do these special state conventions in a state like Kansas. Okay, and yeah, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to cut off the tape here, and I'll pick back up with this slide on Thursday.